All right, might as well just get started. So rock and roll.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just gonna step into the light here. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight. I think it's like minus 37 outside with the wind chill, so it's pretty awesome that you are all here. Hello to everybody in internet land. We don't normally get to do a bunch of these webinars, but this is pretty awesome that we get to do one here. First and foremost, I would like to introduce Megan. Megan works at Factor and is based in Toronto. So this is actually Megan's first time to Saskatoon. So if you please welcome Megan. This is pretty awesome. So before we begin, I just wanted to get a show of hands. Those that are in internet land, we do have a web chat going. Ben, who you cannot see, is going to be manning the computer right now and will be answering all your questions. Just want to quickly kind of get a show of hands about how many of you have utilized Factor before in some capacity, either like tour support, recording, showcase support, marketing. One, okay.
Have you heard of Factor? Yeah, okay, all right.
Excellent. Okay, yeah, so now we kind of know, I guess, like sort of just a bit of a starting point. This is going to be just kind of like a group, essentially kind of like a conversation. So if you do have a question, you are free to ask a question during the presentation. So don't feel like you have to wait until the very end. It's all right. So welcome, Megan.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So tonight's session is kind of a Factor 101. This presentation is it's geared towards artists, and I'll be talking about our 3 most popular programs, which is artist development, juried sound recording, and showcasing. I'll touch briefly on some of the technical side of things, but I won't get too far in depth about how to navigate our online system and all of that. We do have lots of resources and staff who can help you with that. But this is already, it is pretty information heavy, so don't want to bog you down too much. And like I'm saying, please ask questions at any point, and yeah. Okay. So, so some of you, or most of you at least, heard of Factor. So just to give you a bit of a brief background about us. So our mandate is to give grants to Canadian musicians and music companies, and basically promote the Canadian music industry. So where does Factor get our money that we can give to you? We are a public-private partnership, so part of our funding comes from the Government of Canada through the Canada Music Fund, and then our funding also comes from Canada's private radio broadcasters. So who do we fund? So we fund Canadian artists, and we also fund Canadian music companies, specifically artist managers, record labels, publishers, and distributors. And we also fund organizations like SAS Music and other event producers for music conferences and that kind of thing. It's also important to note that we fund artists in all genres of music all across Canada. We have, I think it's 11 funding programs, and we try to have something for every artist at every stage of their career. So it's a pretty broad reach of what we fund. So what kinds of activities do we fund? So as our name suggests, we fund sound recordings. And we also fund the commercialization around it. So marketing, touring, videos, and other digital content. Okay, any questions so far about what Factor is, what we fund and don't fund? Yeah.
I am a staff meeting.
Okay.
And I spoke to someone on Factor a bit ago about recording a second audio album.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be spoken word then. Do you guys fund anything like that?
So we got a question about, do we fund spoken word? And no, that's not something that we fund. All right, so getting started with our funding. So the basic eligibility is that you, or if you are in a band, at least half of your members need to be Canadian citizens or permanent residents. And you'll need to provide proof of that with a passport, a birth certificate, citizenship card, a PR card, or an SCIS card. We don't accept driver's license or health cards. So if you are signing up in our system, you might want to dig up one of those items. Yeah.
Why do you need a passport?
So the question is why we need a passport. It's just one of the possible forms of documentation to prove that you're a Canadian citizen.
So it's not a compulsory.
No. So these are, you can do any one of the items from this list. Yeah. Okay. So all of our entire application process is done online through our online system. And to submit an application to Factor, you need 3 different profiles. And you'll want to, they get submitted to Factor for review, and that can take up to 5 business days. So you want to make sure you leave enough time before you want to submit an application to get the profiles rated. So the first profile is your user profile, and this is basically just your login to our online system. You'll be asked for your email address, basic contact information, and you only need 1 user profile, even if you're in multiple bands or work with multiple music organizations. In our system, we can link your user profile to those different projects and accounts. So just sign up once. The next profile is the applicant profile, and this is kind of the business side or the legal side. So the easiest way that I explain this is think about if you get the funding, the name of the bank account in which you'll be getting the funding, that would be your applicant profile. For example, a band might have a partnership, or you might have might be incorporated. If you don't have that business structure, you would just pick 1 individual in the group to kind of take on the responsibility. When you're making that decision, something I like to remind people about is that Factor issues T4As for individuals and all of our applicants. So just something to keep in mind at tax time when you get that T4A from us. Pardon me?
So the grant is taxed.
It's so the it would be considered other income.
Do you know what rate is taxed at? Does it get hit for 40%?
So a question about tax rate, and the standard answer is we are not accountants, and we always tell people to talk to CRA because, that is not what we do.
So does the band then have to be either a partnership or corporate with one?
No, so the question was, does a band have to be a partnership or a corporation? And no, it doesn't. If you don't have that set up, you would just choose 1 individual. And so, so the payment would be associated with the social insurance number of that person. So it would go to a personal account in that case. No, so the question was, does every artist member need an applicant profile? And no, it would just be 1 for the group.
I've got a question from webinar 2. What about T4As for underage applicants?
So for underage applicants, believe, this is something that's come up. I think at the time, I might have to double check and confirm later. But when setting up the applicant profile, we do have a question if the person is underage. So I think if that underage person has a bank account, then it would go to that name, I believe. But otherwise, I think a parent or guardian could set up the name. But yeah, I can confirm that for sure. Yeah.
Also, as Lorena makes mention, all good questions too for our tax workshop in March. Everybody.
Oh. Yeah. Any other questions about applicant profiles for the moment? If you have one later, you can bring it up later too. Okay. So next is the artist profile. So applicant profile is business side, artist profile is about you and your career as an artist. So the artist profile helps us determine which programs you would be eligible for. I'll talk briefly about our artist rating system. So when you set up an artist profile, you can opt to just provide the minimum mandatory information, or you can provide additional information if you want to try to get a higher rating. So I think last time I looked, we had something like 8,000 artists in our system. And I would say that 95% will get that general artist rating. That rating makes you eligible for juried sound recording, artist development, showcase, all of that. Oh, is there a question? No?
No, that's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Can you give an example of at what point an artist can be upgraded generally?
Yeah. So the question is, what would an artist 2 or 3 look like? So I'm just going to go to the Factor website. And so if you go on the Factor website to this how to apply section at the top, and then profile and ratings for artists. If you scroll down, we have a description of how the rating system works, and then this one called Who Gets Artists 2 and 3. So when you're providing additional information for the artist profile, you're giving information about your sales, streaming, radio charting history, live performance, sync, all of that. So, so this chart, it's important to note these aren't thresholds, but this is kind of a snapshot of what a typical artist 2 and 3 would look like and the kinds of numbers that they're reporting in these categories. So I would say that if you are at or approaching these numbers in the different categories, it's definitely worth providing that, opting into providing the additional information. If you're not and you just want to access JSR and artist development and all that, don't bother doing all that work. You've got your general rating and you can apply. Got a question?
Do you have to hit those numbers, those categories, or
Yeah, so it was a question about do you have to hit it in every single one? So in general, I would say that artist 2s and 3s do perform well in all of the categories, but the rating system is designed to have some flexibility. So it could be that you tour a ton, you're just always on the road, but maybe you don't have a ton of syncs. Then that won't necessarily ruin your chances for getting an artist 2 or 3 rating. So yeah, generally I would say you want to, try to have something in all of those, but it is possible to get the rating if some of the scores are lower, or like if you had no radio charting or something like that. Okay. So as I mentioned, the general artist rating makes you eligible for artist development, jury sound recording, and showcasing. And once you have that rating, that rating kind of stays in place. You don't have to update it. If you want to keep that general rating, you don't have to update or request a review every time you apply. You're good to go with that rating. Okay. Are there any other questions about artist profiles? Yeah, so the question was, who are these artists 2s and 3s? So we don't publish a list of who they are. One thing I would say that you could do is on our website. I'm just going to our website. This is in the factor funded section and recipients. What you could do is, so for example, the Comprehensive Artist Program, that's our sound recording for artists rated 3. So you could look for that and let's see. Let's just try to reset it here. But you could look at that and see, and you can actually see who we've funded in those programs, and that can give you a sense. But yeah, we don't publish the list. I can say that we have about, I think it's 150 artists rated 3 and about 200 artists rated 2. Yeah, not tiny, but in the scheme also not huge. Yeah. So yeah, so I'm just clicking comprehensive artist, and from the past year. And yeah, so keep in mind also we fund all genres all across Canada. So it is competitive. But here are some of those. You might know Andy, but so yeah, so that's something you could do, looking at comprehensive artist, and also you could also look in live performance that will have some showcase, but also some tour. Yeah, so yeah, sure. Yeah, so yeah, the reason why we have the artists rated 2 and 3 is because, for example, this comprehensive artist program, we only have a limited budget for that. So rather than having it be available to everyone, we have to set some limits. Yeah. Any other?
From just the webinar, just wondering, is it a good program then if you're just starting off as an artist then? Like obviously.
Yeah, well, we're getting into the programs, and we'll talk about a great program for starting off. Oh, yeah.
Once you set up an account for all 3 accounts, forever, or
yeah, so so the question is about how long the profiles are good for, and yes, so for a general artist rating, that's good forever, as long as you're in good standing with us. And same for the applicant profile. If you're, there are some differences for music companies who are trying to get music company specific funding, but for an artist, yes, generally your applicant rating and your artist rating are good to go. Yeah.
Sorry, one more.
Sure.
So if you're in a band, does each member of the band then need to be linked to each profile? Like, do we all need a user profile, and then we all link to the same applicant profile, and we all link to the same artist profile?
Yeah, so for so talking about artist members in the group and which profiles they need to be linked to. So like we were saying with the applicant profile, that's just either going to be one individual or the company name. Yeah. For the artist profile, when you're filling it out, there's a section where you list artist members, and you'll provide the email addresses, and that will link it. And each artist member will get an email saying you've been added as an artist member to this group. If you have if this is incorrect or a problem, let us know. Otherwise, we assume that it's approved and okay. So let me know if I'm not understanding, but when it's created, that kind of creates that link, and then every time you go to apply, you'll just select the the profile and all that information is already there. Is that answering the question or no?
Okay, so I think maybe so do you only need to provide proof of your Canadian citizenship when you're funding somewhere?
No, so you provide the proof of citizenship when you're filling out the artist profile, and in that artist members section, you will need to have the proof document for each member.
Okay, so then we either we linked to each one of these profiles and then.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Okay,
Thank you.
sure, sure. Any other questions right now? No? Okay, so talking about our programs. So as I mentioned, we've got a number of programs, but tonight just going to focus on 3 big ones. And there's 2 types of programs. There are juried programs, which are artist development and juried sound recording. And then we have non-juried programs. And an example of that we're going to talk about tonight is Showcase. So non-juried means that you're just hitting the basic eligibility. So if you meet all of the eligibility requirements, you're very likely to get the funding. And I think that's something that some people don't always know about the Showcase is that money is there, and if you meet the eligibility, you should really apply for it. The juried programs are ones where the application are assessed by jurors, and Factor has volunteer jurors from all over the country, and these are artists, these are people who work in the industry, people in radio, and if that's something you're interested in, we're always looking for more jurors, so I can tell you more about that. But when you submit your application from one of these juried programs, you'll have, I think right now it's about 6 jurors will be assessing and scoring your application. Then we get the average score. We come up with a list of all the projects and their scores, and then there's a cutoff. So the top scoring projects will get funded for that round. So it's a little different in that, it's not just about checking the eligibility, it's about making it through the jury assessment. So the first program, artist development. So we had a question on the webinar about a good program for an artist at the start of their career. And this would be that program. The artist development program, it used to be the demo program. And that program, it used to be just for doing a sound recording. It was a $1,500 grant. But in designing this program, we wanted to create something that would be as flexible as possible for artists. So it's now a $2,000 grant, and it supports up to a year of artist development activities. So that could still be sound recording. It could be making video content, touring, showcasing, marketing, basically whatever it is that makes the most sense for you to get to the next step in your career and kind of where you're at right now. The artist development grant is funded at 75% of your cost. So to get the full $2,000 of funding from us, you need to have eligible expenses of $2,667. So for the application materials, you'll need to fill out the artist development plan, and this is a template form that everyone needs to use, and it basically just you'll briefly describe what your artist development activities are, and kind of describe where you're at in your career, what you're hoping to do in the next year, and what you would be using the funding for. You'll also need an assessment track, and that is it's a demo. It needs to be an unreleased song, so, or it can't be commercially released. So if it's just streaming, that's fine. If somebody does have the opportunity to give you money for it, then it's considered commercially released. And then you'll also, the jurors will also look at your artist biography. The artist biography gets pulled from your artist profile. So, so if you're applying, you want to make sure that that document is up to date. So the next deadline.
Sort of a
Yeah.
little question here. What if the song is going to be released shortly after the application deadline?
That's fine. So it's just at the time of application, the song needs to be, it cannot be commercially released at the time of application, but if it happens a day later, a week later, that's totally fine.
Time of application, so the January 25th or the time of use?
The time, yeah, so when I say time of application, that means the time that you hit submit. Yeah. So we have, so the next deadline coming up is in a few weeks on January 25th. We also have a deadline a week before that of January 18th. If you have a new applicant or artist profile to submit, you need to submit it by that date. And again, that's because it takes us a few days to assign the rating. So we want to make sure that once you get the rating, you actually have enough time to fill out the application. We have three rounds per year, and it's usually end of January, end of May, and end of September. So,
yeah, do you make the scores known to the band and the artists and stuff? You like, well, we sucked at the biography or whatever.
Yeah. So, question about how you find out about the assessment. We'll send an email with the scores in each of the category. Another thing I recommend is, while it's not mandatory, we really encourage our jurors to leave comments, and you can request the juror comments as well. And, you know, so that can be helpful to see, okay, what really worked in this application, what didn't, and that kind of thing. Yeah.
It's just like a reimbursement program then,
Yeah, so the question was, is this a reimbursement program? So we will recognize any eligible expenses that you incur after you submit the application. So, so for example, if you submit for this round, expenses that you incurred last October would not be eligible. But if, you know, if you submit tonight and then tomorrow go into the studio or do whatever it is that you're going to do, that would be eligible. Yeah. Any other questions about artist development? We'll talk about it a little more later too. Okay, so next is the juried sound recording program. This is our other juried program, and as you can see, for general artists, the offer can be up to $30,000. So this is a pretty big step up. So of that $30,000, up to $10,000 can be used for sound recording. You don't have to spend all $10,000. If you wanted to spend $5,000, then that would leave $25,000 for things like marketing, video, tour, that kind of thing. This, again, it funds, factor funds 75% of the project costs, so 25% comes from out of pocket or from other public funding sources. And yeah, so the aim of this program is to fund the sound recording and the promotion around an album. Quickly, just kind of what Factor defines as a full-length release is at least 6 tracks or a total runtime of 20 minutes. We can also recognize, you know, a combination of singles or EPs that equal that total amount, as long as it's been released within the course of a year. So that's what we're looking for with a full length. Question?
A series of a series of 3 singles where you have the B-side, so it's with those total 20 minutes spread out over each form of.
Yeah. So yeah, if you released like a series of a single and a B-side, and all in all, that totals the total runtime of 6 minutes, or sorry, 20 minutes or 6 tracks. And yeah, if it happens within the maximum of a year, we would consider that package to be an album. Yeah. Another question? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so question about the funding breakdown. So yeah, so Factor would cover 75%. The other 25% it either comes from you or private sources, and but you can also combine it with other public funding. Our policy about public funding is that our funding plus the public funding of other funders can't equal more than 100% of your costs. So basically, you can't be making money off of the grant system. Generally, in my experience, we artists don't have a problem with that. There's usually enough expenses, and you might find that there are expenses that aren't eligible for Factor, but they may be eligible for the other public funders. So you can kind of claim it that way. But yeah, you can absolutely combine the public funding.
Just a question from the web here. For the assessment MP3s, do they need to be completely done samples, fully produced, mastered, radio quality, or what's acceptable for assessment?
So for the assessment track, generally say you want to do the highest quality as possible. If there are going to be vocals, we say you should really do whatever you can to make sure that's included. But yeah, a question that I've gotten is, if the assessment track, if it sounds too good, will you not get funding because they think you don't need it? That's not the case. You really just want to provide the best quality that you can.
So that 25% total cost pocket, so that 25% can be other funders?
Yes, yeah. So so the 25%, where it says 25% must come out of your own pocket, that could also be from other public funders, again, as long as it doesn't exceed more than 100% of your costs.
So it's just like 25% must come from
not Factor. Yes. Thanks. I will make that edit. Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was about kind of the tone, or how you should talk about your project and plans, and whether whether we'd like to, or this and that. So ideally, you would be going through with your project plans whether you get funding or not. We know that's not always the reality. But I think that it's best to talk about it as if this is the plan, and presenting it as a plan of something that you've thought out. So it's one thing to say, oh yeah, we're just gonna get a studio quality recording. It's another to say, we're going to work with this producer and this, and because they've worked with this person and that sound is what we're looking for, that kind of thing.
For you guys' perspective, still
yeah. Yeah. So I would, and I think in general for Factor or any grant, you should write about it as if you are going to get all of the money that you're asking for, because yeah, again, that's showing that that you have a plan, and you know what you would do with all that money. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So in terms of talking about like what producers are doing, about that, how closely do you guys hold us to that? We decide that we want to go in a different direction, still just the cost of the cost of eligible, or we have.
Yeah. So the questions about flexibility with regards to what you put forward in your application and your plans. So we absolutely know that plans change, and we don't hold you to it. The one thing that I would say is if you do change a provider or you change your plan pretty drastically, you should check in with us to make sure that the new plan is still eligible. Yeah. For example, we don't cover producer fees for non-Canadians, right? So if you switch to a non-Canadian producer, you would want to know that that's not going to be ineligible. You can still use that producer, but that cost wouldn't be eligible. So same thing with the assessment tracks. So for juried sound recording, the idea is that the assessment tracks will be on the full length. Again, if plans change, it doesn't work out, that's totally okay. The idea is just that you have the intention at the time of application to include that. Yeah.
Does it help if you use like familiar names, like as if you use a more reputable, like give them. Is that better? Because like, what if you want to use someone that like is a little bit less known, but that might be like more local to or something?
Yeah. So the question was about, is it better to use a bigger name, or what effect that has on the assessment? I think the most important thing is that it needs to make sense to you as an artist. So I think you're not necessarily going to get extra points because you said you're going to use big name producer, I think the jurors will want to see that you've chosen something that makes sense for you, and that is something that you'll want to make sure that you explain in the application. And if you think it's someone that the jurors might not be familiar with, kind of giving some of that information about their background, or say, I've worked with them, been really happy with that collaboration. And so again, I think it's about showing that you have an understanding of what really works for you.
It's more about just having it solved, right?
Exactly, yeah. So it's basically what you're trying to do with these jury programs is demonstrate to the jurors that you have a really good understanding of where you're at and what the next step is. Your market for your music, exactly how to reach them, and you have a specific, clear plan of how you're going to do that, and it's realistic. So I would say, again, don't try to say things that you think will sound impressive. You want to keep it realistic and specific to you. Exactly, yeah.
What if it is flashy and just by a stroke of luck it's already happening? Like, should you be like, oh, we're working with this huge producer and he's already in for?
Well, absolutely, yes.
Okay. You should put in that this dude is confirmed.
if they are actually confirmed, okay. Yes. And that brings up another point that's worth mentioning, is to be careful about the language that you use in terms of the people that you're working with. If you are confirmed to work with something, yes, by all means say that. If it's more that this seems like the kind of person you would like to, but you've never had a conversation with, say, I plan to approach this person, or I would like to work with, because we've had cases where, with our jury pool, these are people in the industry, and if you happen to drop their name and they've never talked to you, it doesn't really look great. So yeah, but if they should almost be working with that person.
established?
No, I wouldn't say that and I think that's the case for a lot of people, that, you know, you don't necessarily have it confirmed right away. But I do think that that you should do your research and know which people you would like to, even if you haven't confirmed them, because again, that shows that you've done the work to think about what makes sense, and that you're starting to make a plan. Yeah.
Question from the web here, a little off topic, but just sort of in these definitions too.
Sure.
How does factor define the promotional life cycles? Where you have the supports the recording release promotional life cycle. What's that?
So the way our funding is kind of set up is when you create an application, you're creating a project, and the project is kind of an umbrella, and then underneath that there's components. So there's a sound recording component, a marketing component, tour component, that kind of thing. So when we talk about the promotional life in terms of what we're funding, generally speaking, you can apply for new components within that project for up to 2 years. So that can get extended based on when the album actually gets released. But yeah, we're not going to fund the promotion for the next 10 years. But yeah, generally speaking, it's about 2 years of what we'll fund. Yeah.
That kind of touches on a question I had. Say you are awarded whatever amount you're awarded within that calendar year, and then one of the band members has an operation, let's say, or you get school with their own project is kind of shelved. Mm-hmm. Do you have to then rate factor every corresponding time you're in the studio?
Yeah, so the question was about when life happens and what that means. So for example, if you get approved for funding, you'll get a completion deadline for when you need to submit your completion report, and then separately you'll have a deadline for when you need to commercially release the album. For those deadlines, there can be extensions, and again, that usually kind of maxes out at about 2 years. But we offer those extensions in 6 months in increments. So yeah, so you would potentially need to be checking in 3 times. But yeah, if it's something that makes sense and you can demonstrate, that, yes, we've already started recording. It's just going to be a 3-month, then, we always try to do, what makes sense for the artist. Yeah. Okay, so I think we're about to talk about the application materials for juried sound recording. So with the artist development, you provide 1 assessment track. With juried sound recording, it's 2 assessment tracks. And again, at the time that you're submitting the application, they need to be, they cannot be commercially released. The other big difference with juried sound recording is because it is a larger grant and you're getting that promotional support, you need to provide a detailed marketing plan. On our website, if you go to FAQ and resources, and then applicant resources, we have all sorts of information and guides, and one of those is our marketing plan guide. This is not a template that you don't have to follow this exactly, and there can be a lot of marketing plans come in all shapes and forms, but if it's your first time doing it, this can give you some good ideas of things that you might want to include. So some of those things are more details about the album itself, target markets, and kind of getting specific within that. Another big part is the team, and we've kind of been talking about this a bit about, you know, the people you work with and whether they're confirmed or it's a like to have. But I would definitely say that thinking about your team is important. And for the juried sound recording assessment, it's 15 out of 100 points. So definitely something worth addressing. So that can include management, booking agents, publicists, that type of thing. Then just kind of giving information about your plans for publicity, advertising, any social media campaigns, branding tools. So I think, yeah, so the question is about how important social media is. It's a bit hard for me to answer because it could be, depending on who the juror is, they may be more interested in that or not. I think providing providing some of those stats, if you think that's useful and it tells a compelling story, then absolutely include that. Some people, the social media just maybe that's not where their audience is, so it doesn't make sense to focus on that. So I know I keep repeating this, but it is about kind of what makes the most sense for you. And, you know, don't talk about some big social media campaign if you have no intentions of doing that. But yeah, I think and also like with touring, you know, any information you can give about your past history, I think is good and helpful and helps kind of paint that picture of, again, where you're at in your career. But again, it's not mandatory. So the question was, do team members need to be all Canadian? No. No. So there factor for our programs, we have certain eligible expenses. Generally speaking, our expenses are eligible for Canadian companies and suppliers. In some cases, non-Canadian people might be eligible as an expense, but not always. So it's not, so your team members can be non-Canadian, and you can do that. It's just expenses related to them might not be eligible for reimbursement for us. So I feel like I didn't explain that very clearly. Yeah. Exactly. No. Yeah. So so it's if that's the person that it makes sense and you're going to go with that person, yes, absolutely list them. But yeah, just know that for sound recording, that American mastering person. So you don't. You're not required to list Canadians for your team members. And again, it's what makes sense for you and what's the best fit for you. Yeah. So yeah, this marketing plan guide is on our website, and I think I was mentioning to SAS Music, I can compile a list of some of these links that I'm talking about, and they can email them out afterwards. Okay. So for the JSR application, you're providing that marketing plan. And again, it pulls the artist bio from your artist profile, and it has the same deadlines as artist development. It's also worth noting that at any one deadline. You can only apply to one of the two programs. Any other questions about Jared sound recording right now? Yeah. The next one. So the next deadline, we haven't published it yet, but generally speaking, it'll be the deadlines are end of May, end of September, and end of January. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how does Factor define commercially released? So basically, if someone has the opportunity to give you money for that sound recording, that's commercially released. Yeah, so something Bandcamp where it's like a name your price, yes, that's considered commercially released. But if it's just like streaming on SoundCloud or something like that, then they can't pay you. Or if it's just only streaming on Spotify, then that's not considered commercially released. If you were to take it down, yeah, I mean that would probably be okay. I think and we do have some exceptions around the policy about assessment tracks needing to not be commercially released. The idea is that we don't want a case where like the song has been on the radio and the jurors have already heard it, and you know, we just kind of want to create a fair playing ground for everyone submitting. So there's definitely been cases where, you know, it was put up on Bandcamp or it's on, you know, and it's on Spotify and there's fewer than 1,000 streams. Like that's, you know, that's okay. Yeah. Yeah. So in those cases, I would recommend, and I don't think I mentioned this earlier, when you sign up for Factor and get for your artist profile and your applicant profile, when those get submitted for review, you get assigned a project coordinator, and that's a staff member at Factor, and they're your point of contact throughout any application and process. And it's a great person to stay in touch with. And I would just say in that case, before applying, talk to your project coordinator and say, hey, I'd like to use this as an assessment track. It was up on Bandcamp like 2 years ago. You know, it hasn't had much traction, but we're going to be kind of reworking it for this new album, blah, 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 you know, just get that approval. It's always better to, this is the opposite of how the saying goes. You want to ask for permission, not forgiveness. Yeah, because and again, in most cases, if it's something that makes sense, we'll work with you and make sure. Yeah.
Wait, so the commercial release, it doesn't count, it's just on Spotify. It's streaming. You're saying it has to be like you buy.
Yes.
It's pretty much like this, like saying all over the radio and then everyone's heard the song. Straight through.
Yeah.
Heard the song.
So, we have a song that we put up on Bandcamp. It's played on CFC audio. It's played on Rock 102. Maybe. Would it be likely to be that with
yeah, and yeah, I think it is just kind of case by case basis, and yeah, and if you if you can, if it is, yeah, that it's not a big deal, and that there's a reason that you want to include this song on why you're going to you know, remix it, or you know, yeah. So if the song has sync license, To be honest, I don't know. I can't say for sure, yes or no. Again, I think it would just be a conversation with your project coordinator, and again, just kind of considering the spirit of that rule. Like if it's a huge movie that a lot of people have seen, like, maybe not. But yeah, it would. I think the project coordinator would just kind of need some more details. And
If you submit an assessment track for development, you feel like that song is really not bad. Good for JSR.
So the question is, you have an assessment track for that you used for an arts development application, and then so you're saying in the next round, could you use that as an assessment track for jury sound recording? Yeah. Again, as long as it hasn't been commercially released in between, then sometimes people will, if they get funded in artist development, they'll use that money to produce a really high quality sound recording and then use that for jury sound recording application. So that is an option. Anything else for GSR right now? Okay. Oh, sure.
Just came in off the wire. Question has two parts. My last application for JSR missed funding by a fraction of a percent. I did not request comments and found them, or I did request comments and found them helpful, mostly surrounding my team section. My questions are: one, do letters of support count in your team section? And two, if I'm relatively unconnected independent artist, in what way can I build my team section?
Okay, so the first thing I'll address about the missing the cutoff by a fraction of a point. We know that is very frustrating, and I think it's important to note that when we set that cutoff, that's not us saying these projects are good and these ones aren't so much. It's more just about the budget for that round, and we have to draw a line somewhere. And unfortunately, sometimes you miss that by a fraction. And I would really encourage, these are really competitive programs as well. In each round, we probably fund about 40 jury sound recording projects out of about 500 applications. Artist development is usually somewhere between 80 and 100 projects, again, out of 500 applications. So it's competitive, and we do have people who are successful on their second try or their third try. So if you're not successful, please do apply again. So the question, JSR, it's usually around 40 each round, about 500 applications. Yeah. So the question about questions about team. So there was a question about letters of support, and that is something that can be beneficial in your application. There's a spot to upload additional materials, and that can include letters of support from either people who you are confirmed to work with, or it can just literally be a letter of support saying, I'm familiar with this artist, they do great work, and I would totally support them receiving this funding. Those are great things to include for sure. And to the question about how do you develop that team, that's something I would recommend you talk to Sask Music about. So at Factor, we don't give recommendations or advice on specific people to work with, and generally kind of we can give lots of advice about Factor funding, but that kind of larger career advice is not something we do. But I think that is something that you could come visit the folks at Sask Music, and they can help you out with that. I believe that is a benefit of being a member, and yeah, so I would recommend that. And also, you know, talk to people in your community, and you know, get ideas, recommendations, and yeah. But really utilize your music industry association. Another question?
The letters of support, do you have to include those if you have already included a website that
So letters of support versus testimonials on a website. So would the testimonials on the website be for you specifically?
Sure.
I think another thing I like to tell people is when you're putting together your application, you want to make it as easy as possible for the jurors to get the information. You want to arrange it on a platter and just say, here, this is it. So I would say if you send a link to a website, don't assume that they'll click to that testimonials section or that I've worked with, you know, section. You know, I would include that letter of support, or in your marketing plan when you say that you're working with, you know, this producer, you could, you know, copy and paste that testimonial statement in there.
Okay, so letter of support have to be
Generally, the letter of support will be on the letterhead of the company or person, rather than just the quotes. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Yeah. So letters of support are not. Yeah. So that would just be uploaded in the additional materials section, and that section is totally optional. Okay. Any other? These are all great questions, by the way. Okay.
Online said, thank you, Brian.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. So move on to showcase. But again, if you have more JSR questions, we can do that. So showcasing. So this is funding that supports travel costs for performing at showcases that are aimed at a music industry audience. So these are, this could be places where there are booking agents and presenters, artist management, label reps, rather than general public. Sometimes there is an overlap. There are events that are, you know, attended by both, but at the minimum, there needs to be that industry attendance. I will, something like Breakout West. So Factor has a list of showcases that are kind of pre-approved, and that if you get an invitation to play at that, then you're good to go. But we're always updating that list. And again, you can contact your project coordinator and say, I've got this opportunity, and you can have that discussion about whether it would be eligible. So that list, again, on our website, it's in the resources for applicants, in the forms and tools section. It's called the eligible showcase list. Let's see if I can zoom this. So there's lots of things in here. For example, Breakout West. Someone's working on a MUDEM application. There's South by Southwest. Lots of things there. Just keep in mind that you need to be traveling because it is a program that supports travel costs. You need to be traveling at least a 3-hour drive or 300 kilometers away. So if it's Breakout West and it was happening in Saskatoon, then you wouldn't be eligible because you're not really incurring those travel expenses. But again, like I said, this is a list that we update often, and so these are things that would always be eligible.
Does it have to be on that list?
So does it have to be on that list? No. you, in order to get it approved or potentially added to the list, you would need to contact your project coordinator and give information about the event. So the way that the funding is offered for Showcase is it's a subsidy-based calculation. So we look at the people who are traveling, so artist members and any eligible crew, like tour manager, that kind of thing. And so there's an amount given for each person traveling, and then you can get an additional bonus based on where you're traveling. So there's a bump for doing a showcase in the US. There's a bigger bump for Europe, UK, and an even bigger one for rest of world. So in a fiscal year, the factor fiscal year starts in April and goes through end of March. Up to $7,500 can be given to an artist. Up to $5,000 of that can be for domestic showcases, and then up to the full $7,500 can be for international. So in any one application, you're not likely to get that $7,000 for one showcase. It could be that you're getting several showcases over the course of the year. Does that make sense? Okay. Pardon me? Oh, okay. Yes. So yeah, and there's no rollover. So the starting on April 1st, you as an artist are eligible for up to $7,500, and then that ends March 31st. Then April 1st starts over again. Yeah. Yeah.
So we were applying or invited to festival, and before we received funding, we still awarded that funding if we venture ourselves.
Yeah. So so it's the same. Pretty much all of our programs are this way, where once you submit the application, any of the eligible expenses that you incur after that can be recognized. So it could be, yeah. One thing that I will say is, if you, I would recommend if you, as soon as you get that official invitation, you can apply for this program. So you don't have to, so we say that at minimum you have to apply 1 calendar day before you leave, but you don't have to wait until that one day. If if you know several months in advance, it could even be that by the time we process the application, you will get the advance funding before you leave. So those expenses, even if you pay for it other ways, can be eligible. Yeah. So what do you need to apply? So like I was saying, you'll need the invitation to play. For a lot of people, it's usually just like an email. And then the other thing is that you need to have a current release, so a full-length album that's been released within the past 2 years, or you have an upcoming release, so a full length that's going to be released within the next 6 months. That gets listed in your artist profile, and again, same rules with the full length, either total runtime of 20 minutes or 6 tracks, or the equivalent of singles or EPs to make that package. And then in the application, it will also ask for a list of the industry professionals that you're inviting to attend the showcase. Yeah, otherwise you don't have to provide a budget. It's a fairly quick application, and like I said, it is just about checking off that eligibility. So if you're invited to play one of those showcases, really recommend that you take advantage of it. And same as mentioned before, with the public funding, if you get funding from someone else, again, as long as the total expenses, as long as the funding isn't more than 100% of your expenses, you're good. Does anyone have any questions about the showcase funding? Yep, so you can apply over and over. And yeah, if you go to this one showcase every year, that's totally fine. Yeah.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Are there any festivals that you know of that would not be eligible for showcase support? I know it's on like a case-by-case basis, but is there anything kind of like solidified that you just would not be eligible for?
So festivals that you wouldn't be eligible for.
Or can artists just go in and apply and just see what happens and talk to their project coordinator? And
yeah, so I would say talk to your project coordinator before you go to the trouble of filling out the application. Yeah, there's not a big one that comes to mind. And I think you'll notice on the list there are a lot of big festivals that probably are mostly, public, but they're such a big deal that it's a good opportunity. But yeah, I would just say if it's something that's not on the list, just call or email your project coordinator to ask before you fill out the application, and yeah, do it that way. Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other questions about programs for now, or so as I mentioned, this is just focusing on artist funding. We also have funding for music companies. We have a number of other programs. So feel free to ask questions about those. Or yes.
So you're gonna have two more.
Yes. Yeah. So the question is performance fees. Is that eligible? Yes. Yes, and that's also an eligible expense in showcase as well. Yes. So yeah, performance fees, per diems. Yeah, those are eligible. Okay. So I just want to end with some general tips for success, and a lot of these are things that I think are applicable to other funders as well. And also at this time, yeah, if you have other questions, if I don't cover something, or if there's something you've heard people say about applying to Factor, and you want to know what's the deal, feel free to ask.
Question before we get into those tips.
Yes.
Is funding for songwriting courses like Song Studio or Toronto Songwriting Schools? Is there funding for songwriting courses like Song Studio or Toronto Songwriting Schools?
So we have a program called Songwriters Workshop Support. So if it's I don't know off the top of my head the structure of the things that were mentioned in the question, but yeah, if it's a workshop setting and specifically for songwriters to develop their songwriting craft and for songs for other people. So for the songwriter, as a songwriter, not songwriting for your own music. We do have some funding that contributes to travel expenses for attending those events. Again, I would say if there's a specific event in mind, to talk to the project coordinator and see if they would be eligible for that program. But yeah, I would say look into Songwriters Workshop Support. Yeah.
Another question looks like this one's coming in to us from Facebook. What is Factor's stance on regional representation and distribution by province? Is there a quota system that comes into play at all?
Yeah. So we, so Factor funds all of Canada, all genres. We don't have quotas. I think they're, I've gone to other provinces and done territories and done events like this, and I think there is definitely an idea that Factor only funds rock artists from Toronto or things like that. You can find this information in our annual reports, but generally speaking, it ends up being pretty proportionate in terms of geography and genre. So, if we only get 4 applications from PEI and we fund 50% of those, and it's the same 50% for Toronto, then it is kind of what it is. So I think when it comes to those questions about genre or geographic representation, I think I would say don't assume that the funding is not for you or that you're not going to get it. You're not going to get it if you don't apply. So definitely apply. And I think also participating as a juror in our juror system is a great thing to do, because then you are kind of advocating for that genre or that region and saying, this is quality music, this is good, this is something that should be funded. So yeah, I would say in general, it's fairly proportionate in terms of what we fund, but we don't have specific quotas. Yeah, so how are jurors assigned to, how does someone become a juror and how are they assigned? So to become a juror, you submit a brief application form, and that's basically giving your background. We're looking for people, for most genres, we're looking for at least 5 years of experience. In some genres, it's a bit lower. And you're also saying which genres of music you have expertise in to judge. In terms of how the jurors are assigned to projects, as much as, and maybe I didn't mention this, the juries are assigned by genre. So in your project, you'll select the genre for that album. And and we do try to assign jurors match up geographically as well as much as possible. And yeah, so that's, so that these people are familiar with the team members that you're mentioning and can properly assess the music. Yeah. Oh.
Can we be a juror and still apply for grants?
Yes, you can be a juror and still apply. So, and you can even do it in the same round. So, for example, if you were applying for artist development, you would be a juror for juried sound recording programs and vice versa. But yeah, you can absolutely do that.
This one's oddly specific, maybe. If you say that the juror that you try to match it up for geographic location, what do you specifically make music that isn't really prevalent in your genre, in your province, and you are building a team that are also audio province? Because the sound you're trying to do isn't in your
Right. Yeah, so if, yeah, I would say I would try to not focus so much on which juror is going to be on your project, and rather just giving that full detail about who you're working with. And like you said, if you're working in a genre that's not super popular in your province, chances are we probably don't have a ton of jurors in your province for that genre. So it could be that if you're working with people out of your province, that it's a province that a juror's in. Yeah, I would just, in all cases, any kind of team member, you just want to give kind of full information about who they are and what they do, link to their websites or, relevant, online presence, and yeah, just really give that information.
Got another one from the online group here. Can you speak a little bit, Megan, to the jury process from jury evaluations to final approvals? They say, for example, the jury scores and has all positive comments to pass on to the artist, then the jury recommendation goes to a super jury, and we still set the cutoff mark when someone where someone who the jury favorably reviewed doesn't get funded. Is that still the case? Does that change? What's that sort of process?
That has changed. Yeah, there are no super juries. So when your application gets submitted after the deadline, your project coordinator is going to look over the application just purely to see, did you upload all of the required materials? Are there 2 assessment tracks for JSR and a marketing plan? Did you upload the artist development plan, and is it the actual template, or did you just upload something else? So anything that's not anything that doesn't meet that basic eligibility, that's not going to go to the jury. If you do have all those things, it goes to the jury. Factor has a jury supervisor. His name's Jeremy, and Jeremy starts the work of assigning the jurors to the projects. We try to get a minimum of 5 jurors. Sometimes it can be as many as 7 looking at the project. And each juror will, they'll get access to your assessment tracks, the materials that you upload, and they will do scores in each of the categories. Once those scores are compiled, Jeremy will do a check to see if there are any outlier scores. So if one juror, if 5 of the 6 jurors are, in a category gave something 20 points and one juror gave it 3, we're going to knock that score off because that's an outlier. So we are looking for things like that. And then we average out each individual juror's score, and then we look at the scores for all the applications, and we come up with that list. And if we know for this round we can fund 40 projects, we cut the line after 40. From there, when we get that list, the project coordinators do a final check, and then that's looking really closely. So checking to see, was that assessment track commercially released? When you say in your assessment tracks, or you say if there's a certain label going to be releasing that, is that label the person who applied for the project? Just doing those detailed checks. And then if that's good to go, our board of directors does the final yes. And usually, unless there's some major issue, they usually go with the staff recommendations, and then you would get the offer of funding. That whole process, it can take up to 3 months from the time of the deadline. I know with the January round, we really do our best to get those out before the end of our fiscal year. So by March So for that, you would probably hear in mid-March. So that is the process.
That's good, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
When you are setting up a new profile and you're just an emerging artist, what's the turnaround time that you're looking like so that you do get approved or you find out that Factor does require more information? Is it like a 30-day thing or? For
like a new artist profile?
Yeah, if you're going to be applying to get into the Factor system for the very first time, so that if you potentially do get approved, that you can start applying for showcase support for that artist development.
Yep, we try to do it within 5 business days, and oftentimes it'll be quicker.
That's awesome.
And one of the reasons that we for the juried programs we set that deadline. I think I was mentioning before that we set that deadline a week before, is so we can make sure you get that rating and have time to fill out the application. Okay. All right. So some general tips. We all still doing okay? We're good? Yeah. Good online? Yep. Okay.
I'm playing solitaire.
So these are a few some tips and advice for kind of any program that you're applying for with Factor. The first one is say understand your funder. So as I mentioned at the start, Factor is funded by Government of Canada and private radio broadcasters, and our mandate focuses on the commercialization of the albums. So that doesn't mean, so when we say commercialization, it doesn't mean that we only fund things that you hear on the radio. It's not about that. But we want to see that you're trying to get your music out to people, and that it's being promoted, and that you are reaching your specific market. I say this because Factor is not an arts council, and an arts council will have a different mandate, and they might not be interested in kind of the business side of things. You know, they want to know about your creative process, the impact, all of that. So I think that's worth keeping in mind when you're filling out these applications. Who's reading this, and what do they care about? So with a Factor application, the tone you use and the way you write about what you're doing might sound different than if you are applying for an arts council. So I just recommend that you keep that in mind. Big one, start preparing early, especially if it is your first time applying. I will say that the Factor Online system is not the most intuitive. And you want to leave, you don't want it to be the deadline day and it's the first time that you're opening this application form and trying to figure out, why is this thing not opening? And it's probably because you have a pop-up blocker, so things like that. We've got lots of resources to help you navigate that system, and our staff is happy to help as well. But we can only do that if there's the time, and generally speaking, 4 p.m. Eastern on deadline day, you probably don't have the time to do that. So be kind to yourself and give yourself lots of time. Next is read the program guidelines. So each program has a set of program guidelines. Sometimes these can be really long documents, but I would say that taking that 30 minutes to an hour to read that could save a lot of grief down the line. So again, it's to understand what kind of expenses and activities are eligible, and what to expect with the process. Really strongly recommend that. Connecting with your project coordinator, and I would also add with SAS Music or whoever your MIA is. One of our project coordinators often tells his clients to consider him a member of your team. And I think that's a great idea, because when we have all of these programs and rules, and it's often changing because we're trying to respond to the needs of the industry and how the industry changes. I would be surprised if you were able to keep up with that. So it's our job to do that. And talking with your project coordinator, they can let you know about opportunities that may be available. So, for example, last year, Government of Canada gave us more money for international touring. And so suddenly artists now had an additional, 15,000 or an additional 2,500 for showcasing. So knowing that exists, and talking to them about what kind of program might be a good fit for you. So really utilize that resource. Along with that, I would recommend following Factor on Twitter or Facebook, to get those updates with reminders of when deadlines are coming up, or if there are program changes. And we have a monthly newsletter that is a good option as well. So yeah, stay in touch. Next, if someone else is writing your grant, make sure you read it. I get a lot of questions about grant writers, and people want to know if Factor looks at applications written by grant writers more favorably, or someone will say, if I don't have a grant writer, do I even have a chance? And I would say you can definitely do it on your own. You can also definitely hire a grant writer. I think it's just about knowing yourself and figuring out if a grant writer is worth it for you or beneficial. Is a grant writer an eligible expense? It is not. However, a lot of our programs, as part of the funding, includes an administration fee, and that's an amount, and we kind of consider it extra money for kind of the cost of doing business. And I think oftentimes people, could use that for grant writers, or consider it payment for yourself for the work of filling out the grant. Yeah. To be honest, I don't think I could list them off the top of my head right now. There is one for juried sound recording, and there is one for showcase. I don't think there's one for artist development, but don't quote me on that. In the program guidelines, it will, in the funding and payment section, it will say if there's, and yeah, so about if you do hire a grant writer, or if someone else is writing your grant, even another member in your band, you want to read it and make sure you're aware of what they're saying you're going to do, and still being informed about what the program covers, what it doesn't, again, just so you don't run into a bad situation down the line. Talk to previous recipients or search the Factor funded list. We looked at that recipients list earlier on our website. If you're, I think that can sometimes be helpful if you know somebody who has received an artist development grant, to talk to them about the experience, or what was helpful for them in preparing their application, and again, also talk to Sask Music. Understand the public funding policy. We talked about that earlier, about how you can combine public funding sources, again, just as long as you're not making money off the grant system. Some tips for Factor's juried programs. Proposing plans that are specific and achievable. Again, like I was saying, it's about demonstrating that you understand your market, how you're going to reach them, and your plan is achievable. And someone reading it can say, yep, I totally, this makes sense, and I get that this person can do it. I believe it. Great. Proofreading. I think that is a big one that I see in juror comments is about links to websites not working, and just in general, you don't want typos or like a copy and paste error. You don't want that to detract from your application. So again, take that 10-15 minutes to proofread it. Get a friend to read it. Yeah.
Maybe a question about formatting. Formatting. Do jurors like to see more point form, get to the point kind of thing, or flowery, or what sort of? Because they're got to be going through 50 applications, so.
Yeah.
What works better?
Yeah. So, a question about formatting and tone. I would say making it like. You bring up a good point. If they, if they're spending 2 hours looking through applications, you want to make it as easy for them to get that information. And oftentimes bullet points can be an easy way to do that. And I would say avoid the more flowery language. I think the thing about professional writing is it's pretty boring, but you're just trying to get information across. So it might not be the most elegant thing that you've written, but yeah, I would say try to get to the point. And that kind of leads into the next tip about considering your reader. This is, are you making references that make sense? If it's something you don't think a person or a thing that you don't think they'll know, are you explaining it clearly? And yeah, again, they're thinking about what they're looking for and what they're assessing. Are you hitting those points? Choosing the genre wisely. So as I said, the juries are composed of people who have expertise in your genre. Oftentimes, I think there's also lots of arguments that genre doesn't even exist anymore, that it could be any one thing. So my advice is always to pick the jury that you want to be reading your application. Who's going to understand this? Like, yeah, it's a little bit pop and a little bit rock, but like these assessment tracks, will the pop people, will they really get it? Maybe choose that. That being said, we strongly encourage jurors to not get caught up in the genre aspect. So if it is a pop juror and they get an application, and we don't want them to say, oh, this isn't pop, low score, we don't want that. And so I would say don't worry about that, but it is something to consider when you're filling out your application. Who do you want to be assessing this?
Question here too then, are the genres specific to the grant being applied for, or the artists themselves?
It's the genre applies to the artist, and even more specifically the album itself. So it could be that you're a country artist, but you're doing something a little more poppy. Then if the project itself is more of a pop album, I would say choose the pop jury, or if you do think that the country jury might understand it better, you could do that too. But yeah, it applies to the project itself. So even when you set up your artist profile, you select a genre. So so the genre for project application could be different than the one you set up in your artist profile. And I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, when when you apply for the juried programs, you'll get an email notifying you about the results and what your scores were in the categories. And we don't require jurors to leave comments, but we do encourage it. And so you can email your project coordinator and request those comments. And I also recommend, if you're successful, to still request those comments, because again, you're getting feedback about what worked, what didn't, and that can be useful. And or if it's something that maybe you don't agree with it, but you get an understanding of how people are receiving it. So that can be useful information. And I mentioned this earlier. The juried programs are competitive. If you don't get approved the first time, do keep trying. And also wanted to mention another resource. Again, this is in the applicant resources section of our website. It is this jury assessment preparation guide. And this is for both artist development and juried sound recording. And give some of these tips, a lot of these things that we've talked about here tonight. And specific tips for the required materials in the application. So this can be helpful as you're developing your application.
Can you give a breakdown of their
Yeah. So on this last page here, we have the assessment criteria. This is also in the program guidelines as well. But you'll see, and this is another important thing to note, for both artist development and juried sound recording, the majority of your score is related to the music. It's about the assessment tracks. So like I said earlier, really recommend you provide the best quality assessment track you can. Also keep in mind that, you want to pick something that is really going to grab the juror. And, if you have a song with a 4-minute long intro, maybe that's not the one. Maybe it is, I don't know. Yeah, you do want to focus on the music, because that's a big part of the assessment. And you'll see with juried sound recording, the marketing plan is 25%, so that's a big part, and team is just 15. Question?
I was kind of advancing as far as emotional impact goes.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a preference towards more serious songs as opposed to comedy, in a way that, like the Academy Awards are notoriously against comedies?
Right.
Is there like a stigma against that?
Yeah, so the question was about emotional impact, and should you go for something a little lighter, sillier, or serious? There's not a there isn't a preference. And I think another thing that is worth remembering and can be challenging is it's these 5 or 6 jurors on this one day, and maybe the song, maybe it grabbed them, maybe they really liked that silly goofy thing, or maybe they didn't, and that's another reason we recommend, if you're not successful, to apply again, because you're going to get a different jury, and they might have a different feel. But yeah, I think there's not really a formula or recommendation for those kinds of things. So this is so when you get the results, you will get this breakdown of what you scored in each of the categories.
Question, Eric. Is there a place for a high quality cover band / tribute artist submissions, especially for the ASR?
That is generally not something we fund. We're looking for originals. An exception to that would be jazz or classical. I'm working with with standards. In the past, we, on a rare occasion, you know, maybe once a year, have recognized an exception to that. But it would have to be something pretty exceptional. You know, doing, I can't think of an example of what we've done off the top of my head, but, you know, focusing on covers of a Canadian artist, and you're doing it in this special genre or something, something really different. If you can make a compelling case as to why, then it could be considered. But generally speaking, we don't fund cover bands and covers. We're looking for originals. Yeah. And then almost at the end here. So if you do get approved for factor funding, what are the things to remember? The big thing is to keep track of your receipts, and we recommend that you avoid using cash to pay for things, just because it's not as easy to have that paper trail. And when you're providing proof that you've paid for these expenses, e-transfers, you can do a credit card statement, you can black out expenses that aren't relevant, that kind of thing. That's generally a lot easier than cash or trying to remember to bring a receipt book. So recommend that. If you get approved for funding, make sure that you know what the logo and acknowledgement requirements are. So if you get funded for a sound recording, you'll be required to put the factor logo, the Government of Canada logo on it, and there are certain rules about what colors there's going to be and all of that. So know what those are, and you can always, you know, again, talk to your project coordinator, send a mock-up and say, just meet the requirements, just so there's no issues. And finally, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but if you get approved and your plans change, it's usually fine. We just recommend that you contact your project coordinator to make sure that it's all still eligible, and so that you can still get all of the money that you've been offered. So that is all that I have. I'm happy to take more questions, or after we finish, if you have something very specific and want to ask one-on-one, totally happy to do that. Yeah. Yes, so we do our funding through direct deposit, and if we will advance up to 2,000 upfront. Otherwise, it's 50%. So if you had a showcase grant and it was $1,800, you would get that $1,800 upfront. If it was during sound recording for 10,000 for the sound recording, you would get the 5,000 upfront. And the remainder of any remainder of the funding gets sent once you submit a completion report, and everything is good to go on that. Any other questions or?
No, that's cool. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Megan.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, give it up. Megan, yeah. Thank you all for coming out and joining us on the web there. I really appreciate it.
And I want to say, if you're ever in so our office is in Toronto, and if you're ever in Toronto, stop by the office, say hi. We have artists do that, and we love it. And we're in a great part of town. Yeah, please do stop by.
Cool. Yeah, it's like relationships. Working in the music business, it helps a lot. Just even like, if you ever get a chance to meet your program coordinator at Factor, like if you're going to be out at Breakup West or Canadian Music Week, and you do have a chance just to kind of sit down with somebody that you chatted all year with on the phone, I highly recommend it, because you just never know. One thing before we 100% completely wrap up here, I have this workshop series form here. And if you don't mind, I would really appreciate if everybody fills one out. There's like a jar with a bunch of pens in it. The workshop forms are right beside there. So if you could fill that out and hand it to either myself, Ben, or Erica at the back, that would be greatly appreciated. These forms, they do help us let us know exactly like what you want to learn about and just plans for future workshops. So we just greatly appreciate that. One thing else I just want to add too is that if you ever have questions about any sort of grants or applications, we are here as a resource. Use us, talk to us, and like one of the things just from like navigating like the music industry is that always ask questions, never assume, and yeah, never be afraid to just pick up the phone and call Factor. Okay, thank you very much.